Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I'm seeking the Green Party nomination for president, and I'm here to answer your questions. We've had a lot come in, hundreds. And let me just give you a little news first, and then I'll start answering questions. Last week, we got a good court decision in Illinois. We wrote to the state asking for relief from petitioning, given the lockdown and not being able to go out and physically petition with the physical distancing and social distancing. And state didn't give us relief, but we went to court and they put us on the ballot. So Illinois is a big state. And then as far as my campaign goes, we just had wins in primaries in Wisconsin, Virginia, and Tennessee. So we won all the primaries but one, and that was basically a tie. And there's still voting going on right now in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Utah. So if you're in those states, go to those state parties' web pages and see if you can vote. Some parties, you have to be a registered Green or a party member. Others, they'll accept independents who come into the primary. So in those states, I'm asking for your vote if you can do it. And you can go to the vote section on my campaign website, howiehawkins.us. That'll give you more information on those primary races in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Utah. So let's go to the questions. And first question just says, Jesse Ventura. Well, the question is he running? Somebody put out some, podcasters that he's running, and then he tweeted, "No, I'm not. Don't be lazy. Do your homework, journalists." And then now I've heard somebody submitted a letter on his behalf to the Green Party, so now he's saying he's exploring it. It's awful late to get in because the big states, most of the big states, New York's now voting. It's really late to get in if you want delegates. It's up to the Green Party members to make that decision. But my argument to the Green Party members is, look, if we're going to become a major party and force in American politics, we're not going to do it riding on the coattails of a celebrity. We're going to have to organize. We're going to have to go to the communities that are not engaged in politics now at the level they should be, working class people, people of color, young people. And we got to be in those communities. We got to be a palpable presence. Those people got to know us and have a relationship with us and know that we're there and we're going to be there and that we're the place to go to deal with some of these issues that everybody's dealing with. So I think, let's organize, and that's something all of us need to do. Election campaigns, everybody gets excited, mobilizes for the candidate, puts the candidate up on a pedestal. And I'm telling you, I will only go as far as you help me go, because this is something we got to do at the grassroots. That was Bernie's secret. Bernie Sanders, I think in 2015, he was surprised at how many people got involved. And he wasn't able to absorb everybody, but people went out and organized on their own. And that's a movement. And we got to do that through the election and after. And I got one of these circular lights, and now I can see the reflection in my eyeglasses, trying to upgrade the production values here. I hope that doesn't bother you as much as it's bothering me. But anyway, so I don't know what else to say about Jesse Ventura. Talk about stepping aside and giving him the nomination. It's not mine to give. It's up to the Green Party. It's up to the members of the Green Party. They elect delegates to a convention. So any more than, I did say at one point, if Bernie Sanders was ready to break with the Democrats and come to the Greens, we should talk. And people interpreted that, some people, that I could, step aside for him. And I can't do that. I don't have that power. And it would be unfair to all the people that have worked for me. A lot of people worked really hard and have contributed money and like the platform I'm advancing and want to fight for those issues. So I'm not stepping aside. I mean, that would, I'd have family coming after me. They'd kick my butt, as well as a lot of my supporters. So, that's not happening. So Jacob from Jacksonville. Hello, Howie. On your Twitter, I saw a proposal to raise the minimum wage to $20 an hour. A lot of people might be shocked or very suspicious over this due to fears that it might cause inflation, layoffs, or cut to worker hours, or encourage businesses to replace workers with automated technology. as it's been happening for years. What is your response to those arguments? Well, if we had kept the minimum wage we had in 1968, which I earned at the time, I think it was $1.35, maybe it went up to $1.50. If we had kept it consistent with the rate of inflation, we'd be about $17.50 now. If we kept it consistent with the increase in productivity, in other words, the amount of output or value we create with our labor, it'd be over $25 an hour. So $20 an hour is not unreasonable. Then look at it this way. If you're a family of four, I think the poverty line now is 25,400 or something. And that's really poverty. The poverty line we got is way low. It's based on 3 times a moderate food budget or a survival food budget in the early 60s. And it was only meant for short term. You multiply that by 3 back then, that was a rough estimate. But food hasn't inflated. It's been housing, healthcare, college for the kids. So the cost of living has gone up much faster than the poverty line. So a real poverty line for a family of 4 might be more like 40,000. But that's $20 an hour. So I think if people work full time and they should be able to pay their bills. So $20 an hour is reasonable. Inflation, they've been worrying about inflation for years, and even the Fed has tried to do it by, pouring more money into the economy. We're not in a situation where inflation is likely given international competition in the labor market, which keeps labor costs down, as well as all the global trade we have now, which means production costs are down. So I don't think inflation's a problem until we're at full capacity, and then we might pour money into the economy. We could get inflation. Layoffs or cuts to workers, that has not been happening where we've raised the minimum wage. And I don't think it'll happen at $20 an hour, because demand from the people that spend their money, because they're working class, they gotta, they don't have enough money to save. They spend it. That increases demand, and that increases business. So I don't think it leads to layoffs or cutoffs. And as far as automation goes, look, I unloaded trucks at UPS. We know there are ways they could have machines do that unloading. And they've been very slow to automate because our labor is so cheap. I got up to over $22 an hour after 17 years seniority. I started at $8 an hour. And they didn't automate because they had cheap labor. And some of that backbreaking work ought to be automated. The trick is to make sure the increased output and value that we create with our labor with the help of machines should be shared widely. And that's why I'm a socialist. We should be rewarding labor and not unearned income from capital ownership. That's the only way we get billionaires. I think it was Balzac, this literary person in Europe, said, behind every great fortune is a great crime. And whether that's stealing people's labor, you work a fixed wage, everything else you create, the bosses take, the owners take, or you have a monopoly position in the market. And that's not because you worked hard. That's just because you were at the right place at the right time as far as monopoly goes, or you just had a lot of slaves or wage slaves you could exploit. So I don't think $20 an hour is at all unreasonable. It's a living wage, so somebody can live a modest standard of living. So Lana from Palm Coast, Florida, can you elaborate on democratic economic planning? What does this entail? Well, I think let's take public energy. We need a public energy system, and it should be based on locally elected energy boards. So it could be municipal or public energy districts like they have in some states. And that's where the detailed planning goes. And you elect people to a board to work with the technical people to do a plan. And then when people run for those offices, they say, here's what I want to do. I want to go solar and wind. And somebody else wants to go nuke. Like Davis, California, they shut down the Rancho Seco nuke because the people didn't want it. And they had an elected board. They wanted to go solar. They wanted to go efficiency. So that's where the planning starts. And then from the local level, you federate up to the state and national level. So the planning should come from the bottom up. And I think that's the essence of democratic economic planning. And I think we should do that in a public energy system that covers utilities as well as these fuel corporations, the fossil fuel industry the Exxons, the Mobils, the Koch brothers are not going to reinvest their earnings from fossil fuels and renewables, which we need to do to avoid a climate calamity. So what we need to do is take them over and use the earnings from the fossil fuels we used during the transition to 100% clean energy and reinvest those earnings in renewables instead of more fossil fuel infrastructure, fracking, oil and gas drilling in the Arctic, and all that crazy stuff. And I'll stop there. I don't want to give long answers. I was about to describe how we do it in the healthcare sector, because I'm saying Medicare for all should not just be national health insurance. It should be a community-controlled national health service. And since I've gone there briefly, we should have locally elected health boards. In my proposal, 2/3 of the board is elected by the general public, 1/3 by the healthcare workers. And that way, like I'm right here on the south side of Syracuse, we have no doctors or clinics. The one doctor we had, a black woman, it's a mostly black neighborhood, grew up in the neighborhood, came back, started to practice. She got ran out of town by the for-profit health industry. She provided, for example, and this is what got her in trouble, she said, you can go on insulin or you can try diet to deal with, your diabetes. And, if the diet didn't work, she put them on insulin. Well, one guy was doing fine with diet, and then he went on a cruise and drank everything in sight and ate like a pig and got an insulin reaction. So they went after him and after her and tried to get rid of her license. And she beat him. This is the state, medical board. And she beat him, and then said, we're coming back for you. We ran her for mayor in 2001, the Green Party. She now lives in Panama. They just ran her out of town. Meanwhile, up on the hill, 2 miles away, people here, half the people in this neighborhood don't have cars. They got to walk up there. There's a community health clinic downtown that's 2 miles away as well. And that's where they have to get their health service. And then the hospitals up on the hill, they have more MRIs than they need. All the hospitals are competing for customers. So they get too much of some kinds of equipment, and then we don't have clinics and doctors down here on the south side. So with an elected board, the people in this neighborhood would have a say as to how healthcare resources are distributed and making sure everybody's needs are taken care of. And that's economic planning. And that's how, where we put things in the public sector, we make sure that it's responsive to the people. So Packard from Normal, Illinois. Rising tuition has increased the amount of student debt on millennials and Gen Z, which hampers their generations in starting families due to constant debt payments. What would you do to allow these generations to start their lives and families without mountain of debt that is being seen today? Yeah, it's $1.6 trillion in debt. It's more than auto loans, it's more than credit card debt. And the questioner is right. It means people delay families. They're sending money to it's actually the federal government has 92% of those loans. The government should not be making profit. The interest rates are 4 to 7%. The interest rates should be zero. I would have a student loan program that would be both retroactive and going forward. And what you would do is all income above the poverty line, a revamped poverty line like I was talking about before, you pay 10% of your income on your loan for 20 years, and then the rest is forgiven. And if you've been paying, we count that. And we count interest payments against the principal. The only change in the principal would be with the cost of living. So you're basically paying back in real dollars what you borrowed. And of course, along with that, we would have free tuition at public universities, colleges, trade schools, technical schools, and continuing adult education. We would increase Pell Grants so that people can pay for their supplies and their fees and their housing and those kinds of things without going into debt. So we'd minimize the debt, and the debt undertaken would be paid back on an ability to pay basis. So if you're a Harvard graduate that gets a $75,000 job right out of college, being a research analyst at Goldman Sachs, you're probably going to pay your whole loan to that private university back. But if you're a doctor and then you go into public health service and work on a Indian reservation at a modest salary, you might not pay all your loan back, and you pay 10% of income above poverty after 20 years to be forgiven. And I think that's the fairest way to do that. Some people say, well, let's just cancel all the debt. Well, that's a big $1.6 trillion that the government will eventually have to pay back because it's, based on these loans and securities, and that's the taxpayers. And why should, working class people who maybe never had an opportunity to go to college, pay that Harvard graduates loans? So I think it needs to be based on ability to pay. It should be modest in terms of what they pay. And if you're going to a public university and you're modest or low income, it should be mostly covered between the free tuition and the Pell Grants. So, but we got to do something about that debt relief. I mean, those two generations are really, look, it's not even them. I know boomers. I'll mention somebody. I don't think she'll mind. Her name's Coley Clark. She was Medgar Evers' assistant in the NAACP when he was assassinated down in Mississippi. Got active in SNCC, went with Dr. King up to Chicago when he moved the movement north. She eventually went to State University of New York, actually taught there, and took on student loans. She's on Social Security now, and her Social Security checks are being garnished to pay off her loans. That is a crime. So this is an issue that needs to be dealt with. So Brad from Centennial, Colorado, what is the status of the Greens? How do we bring the left under one tent to mount a serious challenge to the one-party system in this country? Well, I think the good news about the Greens is we have survived 35 years. There have been a number of efforts at an independent left party. Probably the most prominent was the Labor Party, had up to 6 million organized workers and unions that affiliated, and they didn't survive. We are still here. We have 129 Greens elected to offices around the country, mostly local. That's more than any party on the left since the heyday of the Socialist Party before the 1930s. So that's the good news. The bad news is there are 500,000 elected offices in this country. 129 is a drop in the bucket. And I think if we're going to build this party into a major force in American politics, into a major party that can beat the damn Democrats and Republicans, we've got to start electing thousands as we go into the 2020s. Local offices, and I include local districts for state legislature and Congress there. And we can do that in those local districts, shoe leather, knocking on doors, even though we can't do it right at the moment. That levels the playing field. And with people power, we can beat the money power. But we can also raise more money than we give ourselves credit for. I think Bernie Sanders set the example. Lots of people giving a little bit adds up to a lot of money. So I believe we can compete. And what we need to do, and I mentioned this earlier, is we got to become organizers. It's not just coming out at election time and, send your messages out, dropping leaflets and so forth. We got to be there year round as reliable allies to people that are dealing with their everyday problems. In the communities, particularly, that are disengaged or alienated from politics. People say they're apathetic. I've knocked on enough doors to know these people will talk and they'll tell you what their issues are and they want something done about it. And they're glad somebody was there to listen to them. So I believe this organizing can be done, and that's what we've got to do. And then as far as unity on the left, yeah, all the non-sectarian groups on the independent left need to find a way to work together because we still have a plurality winner system instead of proportional representation. So we got to maximize our leverage by coming together. We agree on 90% of the stuff. We split hairs on the other 10% and form separate organizations. That doesn't make no sense. We should be able to disagree on some things and continue arguing about that and fight for the things we all agree for. And so I'm trying to do that with my campaign. The Green Party is the party with the most ballot lines and the organizational capacity to get the rest of them with the help from my campaign, frankly. And but I do have the nomination of the Socialist Party, which doesn't have any ballot lines. So it's functionally more like an endorsement. But they are carrying on the great tradition of Debsian socialism. They were the branch of the old Socialist Party when it split that was committed to independent politics and out of Vietnam. And the other two factions had different positions on those questions. So that's a good tradition to carry forward. And then there's independent progressive state parties. And I'm seeking their nominations. Peace and Freedom in California, Progressive in Oregon, Labor and United Citizens of South Carolina, Liberty Union Progressive in Vermont. And I think, on a presidential campaign, we should work together. So I'm, trying to pull that coalition together. So I think that's one way we help, bringing the independent left progressive parties together. But I also believe that our most important task, the one that'll count, the one that matters in the end, is we got to organize the people. I mean, we can organize the left and we're still pretty small. We got to go out and organize the people. We got to build grassroots organizations that are in our communities that people, relate to, rely on, get involved in. And that's what we really got to do. So, next question. Avinash, I hope I pronounced that right, State College, Pennsylvania. Given that thorium reactors do not melt and are much more green than nuclear reactors, would you be in favor of building and or investing in thorium reactors? Well, actually, they are nuclear reactors, and they've been around as an idea for a long time. And nuclear power is probably one of the most unsuccessful industries in history. Massive subsidies. The insurance industry won't insure them. So we have the Price-Anderson Act. And in case of a catastrophic accident, the taxpayers, the federal government, will cover the damages if they do. We just had, I don't know how many, 8 or 10, 12 reactors started in South Carolina and Georgia with loan guarantees from the Obama-Biden administration. And all of those reactors have failed due to cost overruns and going way past deadlines for construction, except 2 in Vogel, Georgia, and they're in trouble. With the money we spend on, trying to do these thorium reactors, we know how to build solar and wind. It's cheaper and getting cheaper. It's cheaper than any of the other options in most cases now. So that's the way we got to go to clean energy. The only nuclear reactor we need is the sun. It's distant enough from us that, it provides solar energy and derivatives like wind, and that's all we need. So no, I don't want to waste money and time on thorium reactors. Christopher from Poland. What is your perspective on censorship? How bad is it? And how does your campaign plan to overcome this problem? I think censorship and government disinformation from governments all over the world is a huge problem. Just a little digression. You may know, and I've tried to make nuclear weapons a top campaign issue. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moved their doomsday clock closer to midnight than it's ever been because of no action on the climate crisis, the new nuclear arms race, and then they said cyber or information warfare. And their concern is there's so much confusion out there with all the nonsense being put out by governments with their own agendas that publics can't come to consensus and make demands on the government to respond to these 2 crises. So I think it's a huge problem. And censorship is part of it. One of the people that I would pardon who released information, we have all these whistleblowers, like Thomas Drake and Reality Winner, and there's about a dozen of them. They're prosecuted under the Espionage Act, which shouldn't even be a law. It's totally repressive. You can't defend yourself in court saying that by releasing this information, you prevented a greater harm. You can't even talk about that. It's very repressive. And now they're going after a publisher and journalist, Julian Assange. All those charges should be dropped. Assange should be freed. Well, and then one of those people I pardon who was a whistleblower is Edward Snowden, who I read his book, what's it called? Permanent Record. And it's a real page turner. It's about how he came to his decision to show that the NSA was spying on all of us. And, then he talks about policies we should have to protect our privacy and to prevent the government from censorship on the internet. And I think he has a good idea on how to balance our right to privacy, our right to information, as well as legitimate intelligence gathering functions, like, finding out what's going on with this coronavirus ahead of time so we're prepared. And the intelligence community apparently warned Trump and he didn't listen. So that was legitimate intelligence gathering. So if I become president, I would not only pardon Edward Snowden, I would bring him into my administration to advise me, or I'd ask him to advise me on policy. And of course, you may have heard that my Twitter account for my campaign was shut down by Twitter. And they sent a note saying somebody's or I'm impersonating my own account, or how do you even do that? How do I impersonate myself? And they said there's no recourse, and gave a link to a complaint page So I looked at that, and I could see that somebody could have impersonated me, saying I was impersonating myself on this campaign webpage. But they said there's no recourse and signed it. Thanks, Twitter. So, we're seeking legal help to try to get that resolved. But that is a form of private censorship. State censorship is a big problem, but so is the censorship of the media industry, where you have basically 6 conglomerates that control most of the mass media. And then you have these tech platforms like Twitter, like Facebook, that can just decide, you're banned. And what's your recourse? It's not democratic. And I've suggested that maybe these platforms, because the nature of these platform networks is everybody wants to be on the platform, everybody's on. So it's a natural monopoly. And natural monopolies is a commonplace, a logical place where you have public ownership and enterprise. And that's where maybe these should be public utilities operated for public benefit instead of for private profit. So, yeah, censorship is bad. And it is getting, I think, worse because governments with this new technology have more sophisticated ways of controlling internet. In some countries like China, they got a whole different internet than the World Wide Web that we're on. And they regulate what comes in and out. And we don't do it so blatantly, but we got these, big tech companies that can exclude. And then we lost net neutrality that we got to get back because now they can basically charge it like a toll road, and you pay extra to go in the high-speed lane when you're commuting or on the left, and you pay an extra toll. Well, they're going to start doing that on the internet because it's not neutral like it was. It should be a venue that everybody can use equally, and everybody can get to any location on the internet they want without paying extra tolls. So that's a big topic. So Frazier from Perryville, Missouri. In this time of crisis, why not come out and endorse UBI fully? Well, I have endorsed this $2,000 a month per adult and $500 per child proposal that I first heard from Bernie Sanders. Ro Khanna has a bill in the House. And I think that's what we need to do now, just to get the money out the door because it's got to get out quick. People need it. They're missing their rent payments. Small businesses are going out of business. I mean, we got a real disaster out here. But as a long-term policy, I prefer a guaranteed income above poverty built into the tax structure. So instead of sending money to the Jeff Bezos's, so Steve Forbes, Bill Gates, Donald Trump's, rich people that don't need the money, let's get it to the people who do. So the way this would work is if your income is below the poverty line, the government sends you money to bring you up above the poverty line. So the people that need the money get it. And then if you make more income above the poverty line, you pay progressively graduated taxes, which our income tax needs to be much more progressive than it is now. But that's the principle. So that's a lot less cost to the government, to the taxpayers than sending checks to, Warren Buffett who doesn't need it. So I think it's the principle is want people to have an income above poverty so people can, live a decent standard of life. And that's good. But, just give everybody the same check, whether they're super rich or dirt poor. I don't think that's what working class people should be paying their taxes for. And we're in a situation now of total tax injustice. Labor income is taxed higher than capital income when you count local, state, and federal taxes. And there's a great book out I urge people to read called The Triumph of Injustice by Gabriel Zuckman and Emmanuel Saez. It's pretty short, it's easy to read, and it's real clear how regressive our tax system has become. And it's one of the reasons why we have such great and growing inequality, which is, I've been saying in my stump speech, inequality kills. Life expectancies for the working class have been declining. The average life expectancy has declined over the last 4 years. The life expectancy gap between our richest and poorest counties is now 20 years. And that's a result of this growing economic inequality and widespread economic despair. The sociologists call them deaths of despair in the working class, and that's got to end. So that's why this guaranteed income above poverty is a part of my economic Bill of Rights, which, wasn't in Bernie's. He had 6 rights. He included a clean environment, and I agree with that, but You didn't have a guaranteed income above poverty. And that's a demand that the civil rights movement, when they picked up the economic bill of rights idea, the old FDR idea, and brought it into the civil rights movement, and they were concerned, somebody mentioned automation earlier, you know, and they were speaking for a lot of black folks who had moved up from the South to factories that were multi-story factories in the 50s, but were moving to the suburbs where they had those longer assembly lines and one-story factory campuses. And they found they were the last hired, first fired, discrimination, living out in those suburbs, transportation getting out there, all kinds of problems. So the unemployment started going up in the inner city. And that's why the guaranteed income was part of their demands during the 1960s. So next question. Lihue, I hope I pronounced that right, Hawaii, where I have cousins I was hoping to visit during this campaign, and with this lockdown, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do it. But anyway, what will we do with the vehicles that burn gas? Recycle them? Yeah, I think that's a good idea. There's a lot of materials there, metals, plastics, rubbers, electronic components, a lot of toxic things that we need to dispose of properly. And I think that's what we do. We got to stop burning gasoline and go to electric vehicles, but put most of our transportation on electrified rails. The trolley systems all the cities had between the 1890s and 1930s need to be rebuilt. We need high-speed bullet trains between the between the cities for intermediate, and that will replace intermediate and short-range air travel, which is a difficult technology to get the carbon reduced. And then we need to put a lot of the freight on electrified rails, and with a lot more rails, a lot more dense networks. We had a much more dense network of rails until trucking really got going in the 1930s. And we need to get back to rails. It's much more efficient. It's clean electric energy if we do it right, and much more efficient use of that electricity than electric vehicles. So Dave from Boston, with the Eco-Socialist Project in mind, what tangible ways will we see increased worker community ownership of the economy under a Hawkins presidency? Parentheses, subsidies to worker co-ops, nationalization of industries, local planning assemblies, participatory budgeting. Well, all those things would be part of the Eco-Socialist Green New Deal we're proposing. We want to take over particularly the energy sector, utilities and the fuel companies, the transportation sector, the railroads and the airlines. Now would be a good time to buy those airlines. They're a lot cheaper than they were. And of course, it's not going to happen under Trump or the Democrats for that matter. And then manufacturing. And what I'm saying in this Eco-Socialist Green New Deal is we got to do what we did during World War II emergency. The federal government took over a bill to quarter the manufacturing capacity of the country in order to turn industry on a dime into the arsenal of democracy, to arm the US, the UK, and Russia to defeat the Nazis. And that's what we need to do with coordination and planning to get our industry turned on a dime to clean energy and also zero waste technologies. Because we got other, existential environmental problems. Toxics are killing insects, which are essential to the ecosystems, which are essential to agriculture. We got a huge plastics problem. We got other toxics. So there are other environmental problems. So we can rebuild all our technology on a zero waste as well as clean energy basis. So for example, cement, 5% of the world's carbon footprint. That's because when they heat it up, they throw in calcium carbonate, the calcium hardens the cement, but the carbonate evaporates into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, and that's a greenhouse gas. There are other ways of making cement. We can make steel with electric arc furnaces instead of coke ovens. We can make plastics with agricultural feedstocks that are biodegradable if they are not recycled. So if they're out in nature, organisms will break them down and recycle them in the biosphere, whereas the synthetic plastics we got now, they aren't reabsorbed, or if they're ingested, they can be carcinogenic, mutagenic, in other words, cause mutations in our genes, and that can cause health problems. They can disrupt hormones. There are all kinds of problems, and they're ubiquitous. It's a huge problem, these microplastics, because that's what the non-biodegradable plastics break down into. So that's why It's not just clean energy, it's zero waste. So with the manufacturing plants that the federal government would create, these Green New Deal factories, what happened after World War II is those factories, they just gave back to the super rich and their corporations for pennies on the dollar. And it was a big subsidy to them. What we want to do is keep them in public ownership, but lease them to worker co-ops so the workers can manage their labor process and keep the full fruit of their labor, of the value they create. And so that's where we would encourage worker co-ops. I think we need a whole program of financing and technical assistance to start new worker cooperatives, convince retiring owners to sell them to their employees rather than sell them to another capitalist. So I think that's a big program to encourage more worker co-ops in the private sector. And you mentioned local planning assemblies and participatory budgeting. Well, the planning assemblies, I described it in the energy sector and the health sector. And we should have citizen assemblies, like town meetings in New England, where the people assemble at least once a year, and they're the legislative body. It's direct democracy. They decide on the town budget, they elect the town officers. And if they need to meet again on a special issue, it doesn't take that many citizens to call a town meeting. And so that's where democracy can start from the bottom up. And they should address the big planning decisions that the town has to face, and the towns together that the region has to face, and so on, so that people can be engaged. It doesn't mean they have to do, make a decision on every technical decision that needs to be made as you, plan whatever it is, transportation or manufacturing this or that item. But where they want to get engaged, where they're concerned about an issue, like, just take what kind of energy we're going to have. Back in the Truman administration, they were worried we're going to run out of oil back then. So they formed the Paley Commission, which reported to the Eisenhower administration and said our future should be solar. And Eisenhower chose nuclear, not because it was better energy, but because we had a nuclear weapons program, and the peaceful atom kind of provided political cover for that. And that's how, now that decision wasn't made by the people democratically. It wasn't even made in the market. It was made by military and business elites. Of course, GE and companies like that had a big interest in nuclear power, and they had influence. And participatory budgeting, that's what town meeting is. We have participatory budgeting now where in a lot of cities, the community development block grants, the CDBGs, the communities get together and they rank their choices on what projects they want. It's token. We really need them to have a say on, the whole city budget should go to the neighborhood assemblies. And the city should explain, here are the issues, here's the revenues we expect, here are the costs, here are the police, the fire, the road, cleaning the potholes, sanitation, social programs, what they cost. And then, let the people say, what they think their priorities are. And, hold their counselors that represent those assemblies accountable. That's the kind of participatory budgeting I want to see. Not token, but, as wide a spectrum as people at the grassroots want to engage in. So, Eli from New London, Iowa. Seeing as I live in Iowa, and as of this writing, you will not be on the ballot in November, how can I help you get on the ballot in November? We're going to get on the ballot in Iowa. We've done it I think all election cycles since '96. Off the top of my head, I don't know what your signature requirement is, but as I recall in Iowa, it's not one of the worst states. And in this coronavirus environment, we are writing, we put together a team of lawyers and ballot access activists who are helping the state parties draft letters to their state governments, the governor, secretary of state, the legislative leaders, saying, look, with this physical distancing, social distancing, petitioning is untenable. We need relief. And one argument we've made, and this is how we won in Illinois, we've been on a ballot for several election cycles. Just put us on the ballot and let's have an election. It's democratic. In other states like New Jersey, they've asked for electronic petitioning, which I don't think people should underestimate the difficulty of that. It's not like, you confront somebody personally and they got to tell you no. It's maybe easier to know to ignore it online. We'll see, but they only have to get 800 signatures, good ones. So that's not so bad in New Jersey. And And in some other states, there's filing fees, and they're saying, look, we're going to do the filing fee. We would have got the signatures. Just put us on with the filing fee. So I'm not sure what the detailed answer is for Iowa, but if you go to our website, howiehawkins.us, and go to the, I think it's the vote page that I talked about earlier, you can get a report on what's going on, and you should be able to, by just hitting the contact on the website, say you want to help in Iowa, and we'll make sure you can help, because we want to get on in Iowa like we do on all 50 states and the District of Columbia. So Wayne from Glens Falls, New York. With your eco-socialism platform, in what ways do you plan to roll out economic initiatives associated with your platform? What industries do you seek to nationalize? And how would you go about that process? How can you enumerate the ideal step-by-step process and how that would look for the American people? Well, there are legalities involved. There's some things the president can do, some things that the president would have to go to Congress for. And I haven't, laid that out in detail. But I do know we can do what we did during World War II. And in order to get into the war production industry and turn industry on a dime, they formed the Office of War Mobilization. And that coordinated all the federal agencies as well as the sectors they took under public control. And I've been saying we need an Office of Climate Mobilization. And that Office of War Mobilization evolved into the War Production Board, and that really did the economic planning. And I think in this case, we would, have some kind of Green New Deal planning agency. That's what it would evolve into. And the industries that are at the top of my list that I mentioned are energy, transportation, and manufacturing. Manufacturing, because our manufacturing industry is pretty gutted. We don't even have a machine tool industry to speak of. And that's the industry that makes the machinery that produces intermediate and consumer goods. Right now, we're dependent on other countries for a lot of these things. And for energy efficiency and environmental reasons, as well as just having our own economic and political independence, we should have those industries in our country. So I think that's important. Those are the industries I would seek to nationalize, as well as healthcare. And when we say nationalize, I prefer socialize on a democratic basis. This federal model I described in energy and healthcare. We want bottom-up planning. There are countries that nationalize, for example, oil. A lot of countries, right wing and left wing, nationalized oil during the Watergate period when the U.S. was busy dealing with their crisis. So everybody from Venezuela already had, Venezuela, and that was a conservative government. Saudi Arabia, that's a conservative government. I mean, all these countries, nationalized their oil at that time. And so that's a logical industry to nationalize. So the ideal step-by-step process, well, ideally, the people elect me on a mandate. I mean, if I'm elected, there'll definitely be a mandate because it'll come from nowhere. And the only reason I would get elected is not because everybody knows who I am, but because they like the program that we're talking about and they mobilized. And that would be a mandate that we can tell Congress, look, the people want this. If you aren't down with it, it's only 2 years in the House to your next election. And for a lot of you senators, your next election. And if the people want this, let's do it. Or otherwise face the consequences of the next election. And how would that look for the American people? Well, I think what we're talking about would look good. We know the Green New Deal polling after it went viral when the Sunrise Movement and AOC sat in Pelosi's office. They took a poll a few weeks later, and over 80% of the American people wanted the Green New Deal, including 64% of the Republicans. So there's a lot of things, like Medicare for All is another one where people may call themselves liberal, moderate, conservative, but when it gets to the practical solution to a problem, they agree, or large majorities agree. So I'm told by the people that I'm working for, my campaign staff, this is the last question. So what do you think of hydrogen in the Green New Deal as an energy storage and transportation medium? I love hydrogen. I've loved it since Lewis Mumford, for those of you familiar with him, described a solar economy with hydrogen and storage. Cost is an issue, but it does have its uses. And I think, it's a good energy storage medium. And, when you use it, the byproduct is water, just, H2O. So it's very clean. And so I think to the extent it's economical, we should use it. So, anyway, I'm supposed to stop because they got me doing other things. It's nonstop in this campaign. And, I'm sure we'll do more of these question and answers. I'd just like to remind those of you who are in Utah, Pennsylvania, and Ohio that tonight is the last opportunity you have to vote if you haven't in the Green primary. And just go to the vote tab on my campaign website, howiehawkins.us, and that'll link you to where you need to go. A lot of these votes are online, where you download a paper ballot and mail it in. And so I hope everybody that wants to help me get the nomination will do that. And I enjoy answering these questions. I wish I could see y'all. That's what we do on the Zoom conferences, but this is a different format. So I've been talking at myself. It's kind of strange. But anyway, I hope you got some better idea what we're trying to do with this campaign. And I look forward to the next time. And I hope you all have a good night. And please be safe out there. This coronavirus, no joke. I got family, got friends who have got it, got sick. There's supporters who have died. There's supporters who have recovered too, thank God. But, really be safe out there. So take care.